We have seen many predictions about the end of the world, but none of them came true. What if it's not the end of the world that we need to fear, but something completely different? Something that has already happened, or perhaps is happening at this very moment. Our story begins in 1971. It was then that the first group of Western doctors decided to help zombies. At that time, the overwhelming majority of living beings on the planet believed that zombies weren't real. Even those who claimed otherwise had no proof to support their claims. In short, zombies remained the privilege of horror movies and cheap thrillers. However, some people knew perfectly well what a zombie really was, and these people worked in Doctors Without Borders. By combining efforts, they saved the lives of several dozen zombies who at that time were in critical condition and soon would have decayed. The organization took all possible measures to keep the reanimated corpses alive. After an extensive series of tests, they created a special serum made up of various vitamins and chemical compounds that allowed the zombies to slow down the decay process and stay alive for an indefinite period of time. Soon there were more and more people willing to help the zombies, and by the beginning of the 80s, dozens of specialists from around the world joined forces in this unique project. As a result, by the year 2000, there were already several thousand living zombies across the globe, and by 2010, their number reached 100,000. By that time, most of the territories where the zombies lived became uninhabitable for humans. The zombies destroyed absolutely everything, including themselves. This led to the fact that the only way to feed them was through humanitarian shipments delivered from other countries. Since the number of zombies was constantly growing, this meant that more and more food needed to be delivered. There simply wasn't enough food in the world to feed everyone, both living and dead. Thus, by 2015, a global food crisis erupted, which threatened to destroy the entire human civilization. To prevent this, it was decided to launch a large-scale resettlement of zombies. For the next 5 years, most of the zombies were resettled to developed countries, where they provided each person with an individual approach and tried to explain that now they are reshifting to a plant-based diet. Some of the zombies agreed, but many others didn't. They argued that it was their right to eat meat, and no one could take this right away from them, and so the scientists had to retreat. Then began the most massive manhunt in history. People fled their homes, hiding in shelters, forests, anywhere to avoid becoming dinner for the ravenous zombies. But there were so few places left for humans to hide that sooner or later they would have been completely wiped out. And then the most unexpected thing happened. A lot of people began to say that eating people was normal, natural, and even necessary. Some of them actively campaigned for this, while others even launched training courses, teaching people how to make themselves less appetizing, and how to put up with zombies eating their friends. Yes, you heard right, how to put up with this. Unbelievable, but true. All these people said that we can't just abandon our zombie brothers because they once used to be people too. And yes, they do seem to be very unpleasant and even scary neighbors, but they still deserve a second chance. As the zombie population increased, humanity began to diminish rapidly. Fewer and fewer people were seen on the streets. Stores were gradually emptied and traffic jams disappeared altogether. We should note that initially these processes occurred in different parts of the planet simultaneously, but as time passed, the epicenter of events shifted more and more to the west. At the same time, the main victims of the zombies were the representatives of the white race. As it turned out, zombies preferred their flesh to everyone else's. But apparently the hunger for meat was so great that after a while they didn't bother with preferences. White or not, they ate everyone regardless of skin color. However, by the mid-2020s, their food supply dropped significantly. This led to the fact that the zombies began to look for new sources of food on their own. As you can probably guess, it was people who became those sources, and the problem quickly got out of control. But let's take things in order. If you think that all of this sounds like a plot of a movie, you're wrong. All of this actually happened in France. Most likely the first victim of the zombies was the politician Jean-Paul Leclerc. He went missing in June of 2022, and since nobody knew anything about his disappearance, the police called off the search after a month. Nevertheless, Leclerc's brother didn't give up and hired a private detective. It turned out that the politician had gone to a cafe in the city center, where he met a stranger and went somewhere with him. According to witnesses, it was a tall, thin man with dark skin. The last place where Leclerc was seen was a deserted beach on the outskirts of town. When the police arrived there, they found traces of a recent fire and signs of a recent struggle. Apparently, the politician was killed here, after which his body was dragged away. Unfortunately, despite the efforts of the investigators, the case ended up being classified as unsolved. And meanwhile, similar incidents began to occur throughout France. Men of different ages and social status went missing without a trace. But law enforcement agencies did everything they could to reassure the citizens. Well, as far as they could, because the police officers themselves were afraid to go outside. Meanwhile, the number of missing persons was steadily increasing. According to official data, more than 3,700 people went missing between 2016 and 2022. However, unofficial estimates put the figure at more than 40,000 by 2025. Less than 1% of the population remained on the streets of France. That's approximately 5 million people. The rest either left the country or died. But what's most interesting is that almost everyone treated what was happening as something completely normal. Listen to that. Even French feminists joined the zombies, uniting under the slogan "My body, my choice." Let me remind you that this is exactly the slogan under which the feminist movement operated in the late 2010s. At that time, it was mainly about a woman's right to an abortion. But now it's taken on a whole new meaning. The thing is, the feminists realized that the fight against the patriarchy would be greatly facilitated if they distracted the zombies from eating them, and they came up with a brilliant plan. Tens of thousands of women willingly signed up for pregnancy, which would allow the zombies to eat them without any problems. Moreover, after the birth, the women immediately signed papers giving up their parental rights. Then they went in for abortions, handing the children over to special services that secretly sent them abroad. This allowed millions of women to save themselves while also saving millions of children who would have otherwise grown up in zombie families. The leaders of the feminist movement went down in history as real heroines, and the rest of the women received the status of martyrs. However, by the end of the 2020s, the supply of white people ran out, and although the number of missing persons began to decrease, the zombies weren't satisfied with that. You see, they remembered what the taste of human flesh was like, and now nothing could replace it. But the problem was that ordinary people were no longer seen on the streets, so the zombies had to resort to desperate measures. In the fall of 2029, a terrible incident occurred in the city of Limoges. 3 men and 2 women were eating lunch at a cafe, when suddenly a group of zombies attacked them. One of the men managed to escape, and later he told the police that the attackers were tall and thin, dressed in rags. He also noted that they looked at him hungrily and smelled bad. Interestingly, the eyewitness didn't report this incident immediately, fearing that he would be considered crazy. But the police didn't think he was crazy. They understood perfectly well what kind of threat humanity was facing. Although the French authorities did everything they could to keep this information from the public, the media eventually got their hands on it and published the story. This was the beginning of the end for humanity. Within a few months, the survivors were completely wiped out, and the zombies became the undisputed masters of France. Or maybe this is just another fake news. After all, this is a channel about a fictional apocalypse. But what will happen if one day you hear the news that zombies are real and they're already among us? Would you rather build a shelter or try to flee to another country? Share your thoughts in the comments.